The next segment is ground-up ways of generating sector data. And we have invited Emily Perkin from Just Cause. Just Cause is what earlier I called a social cause consultancy. But it's a strange thing to call it that, and she can describe what she does herself better. But it's an example of a community asset, right? There's impact, there's Just Cause, there's a group of people supporting NGOs and nonprofits with research and consultancy. And so Emily is managing director of Just Cause and has around 12 years of experience in the social sector as a consultant, staff member, trustee, and volunteer. She's been in Singapore since February 2013 and has worked with many charities, social enterprises, and donors across the region to provide philanthropy advice and impact measurement support. Her wide-ranging practical experience includes conducting large-scale value-for-money assessments for central government, managing a knowledge network for charities in Japan and Afghanistan, and co-founding an award-winning social enterprise in London. Can we welcome Emily, please?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for reading out my bio there, Justin. It's quite embarrassing. Right, I think I've got the double death slot here because we've had our lunch and then we've all sat through a long slot, and it's been a long time since anyone's had a coffee. So that I've got at least some hope of people listening to me. Can you all just do me a favour? Stand up. Up. This is a quick wake up. Okay. Up. There's still some people sitting. Okay, now everyone's up. Now, if you can, first of all, high five the person next to you. Excellent. Okay, and then Justin said he's going to Japan next week, so in honor of that, can we have a little bit of bowing? Very good. Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Okay, I'll try to speak quite briefly, but we're following on from the same topic about open data. This time it's not so much about the social needs, mapping the needs. This is actually mapping who's doing what amongst the social sector organizations, amongst the NPOs. So this is the follow-on. Justin's mentioned I've set up a small organization called Just Cause a few years ago here in Singapore. And we're a not-for-profit ourselves, and we see our role as in providing a kind of independent research evaluation for both non-profits and for donors. We are not academics, so we don't do beautiful, rigorous, long studies, but we try to kind of fill some sort of gap for doing shorter, more practical kind of consulting style work. And so some of it is evaluation for non-profits, some of it is research that is commissioned by donors, and then some of it is what we would see as advocacy, particularly trying to promote more time spent within the sector to do research and evaluation and learning. One of the projects that we have been kind of batting our heads against for the last 3+ years is this idea of building a kind of public access database of non-profit information, social service organization information. And we launched a prototype last year, which you can see up on the screen. So there's a front end which has got about 50+ organizations that you can search through, and then you click on one and you get a relatively detailed profile of that organization, covering all sorts of things like what are their programs, how many staff do they have, what does their board look like, what do their financials look like, what's their approach to measuring impact, etc., etc. And the back end is just a big database. So a lot of volunteers contributed to this thing over the last 3 years. My colleague Wen Yi is over there. I want to call her out because she, in particular, spent vast amounts of time trying to kind of go out to many organizations, ask for the data, and pull it together. The reason we did this was actually with the donors in mind. So it was less to try and provide the information back to the sector. It was more to try and, what can I say, help with this educating of donors so that donor decisions are made a little bit more based on fact and a little bit less based on I'm just going to say it, ridiculous statements like we touched 1 million lives doesn't mean anything, it's misleading perhaps. So this was the idea, was to get more real information out there and using that to influence donors to make better decisions about how they support organizations and which causes they do support. I'm having kind of been through a long journey with this thing, I'm still a huge believer in it. I think it could be hugely useful, not only in influencing donors, but also actually back to non-profit organizations as well. If it reached critical mass, if we had enough NPOs listed on this database, then I think you could start to analyze it and pull out findings that could be very, very helpful. For instance, say you could see how if you're working within a nonprofit, see how your organization compares to the rest of the data set on certain metrics, like staff turnover. If you say our staff turnover last year was 10%, and then you can actually see how that links to, how that relates to everyone else who's put in their information, right? Or just searching quickly to find potential partners. If everyone's tagged with what issues they're tackling or what impact they're trying to achieve, then you could search and find potential collaborators. Or also could be used as a way to look for sharing of lessons learned. If one of the fields was something as simple as our biggest lesson learned last year was, and then you could start to build a data set around that people could search. So I think if we got enough organizations to populate this thing, there's loads of potentially practical insights that it could bring back to the nonprofits themselves in terms of communicating to donors, and I think also back to researchers and government agencies as well. However, after 3 years of trying, we just realized we can't do this thing alone, no matter how many volunteers help us and no matter how much blood, sweat and tear we pour into it ourselves. Do you know this picture? You know this myth of Sisyphus? Yeah, this is so, we just can't get that rock up that mountain. Frankly, when I say chasing orgs, what I mean is individually contacting lots and lots of nonprofits and then asking them to provide us with up-to-date data, and frankly quite a long list of it, like it's about 8 pages long, the one that we've been doing to date. It takes a long time because you're bugging busy people for specific bits of data. And then even once you've got it, and I think this is one of Justin's points, it's only live at that point in time, and it's going to need refreshing periodically. So you're going to have to go back again and keep chasing. And then also we found practically that as we went asking people for data, whilst some immediately said this is a great idea, this will really help to get more fact out in the public domain, others were very understandably very wary of what was our agenda. Were we trying to get something out of it? Honestly, we weren't. We were kind of trying to be very kind of pure and do this as a non-profit undertaking ourselves. Like there wasn't an agenda, but that's hard to communicate, and I think didn't always land. So out of all of the organizations that we have approached last year, asking them to kind of participate in this and give us our data. Actually, I don't know, I'm going to jump to what percentage do you think turned us down? 30, she said 30, so yeah, 70% said they would participate, 30% were like, what is this, or didn't have the time, whatever. So point is, we've really tried at this thing. We tried to do it as a central organization, and we've reached a point where we don't think that we can ourselves build it to a critical mass. So it leaves us with the question of how is there a way to make that sustainable, make this data set large enough and regularly updated. And hence linked to Justin's thinking, can we shift the thinking altogether and make this open source? Could we make it something as simple as a Google Doc, which just has a whole set of different fields, and maybe we could have a structure where once a year we can email out to a whole load of organizations who've expressed interest and say, could you please update your data? And then organizations just once a year take, hopefully not too long, to go in and refresh the data on them. If they don't want to provide something, they can skip it out, but hopefully we can build it like that. And then the system would be anyone could then go in and do what they want. You've then got a nice database, and all you researchers out there could, dive in and do something cool with it. Possibly to incentivize participation, you could do some kind of bonus level of access if you participate. It could be one thing. And maybe if it got traction, if a volunteer or a pro bono organization stepped up, or if some funding came in, someone could develop a prettier front end, so it's no longer just a Google Doc. It becomes something that's prettier and more searchable. It could go in that direction. And what we can offer is we've at least got the data set that we've constructed last year, which is, how many organizations have we got on it? 58 in Singapore, and for what it's worth, probably about 20 in Malaysia, Indonesia as well. So that could be a starting point to get the ball rolling at least. So that's what I wanted to sort of talk you through. We've tried to do it centrally. We can't do it, but can we shift this over to be an open source thing? And I'd like to kind of leave it with questions for the group, really. What I've described, would it actually be useful for your organizations? And I'm particularly pointing this at the people who are actually working within the SSOs, the nonprofits. Would you find this useful? Would you make the time to update it? And if we did carry on with this, what data would be helpful to include in it? So those are my questions back out to the group. I'm going to leave it on my one kind of biggest concern, which is how would we, if we opened it up, how would we ensure the integrity of what gets keyed in there? Would it, we thought that doing it as a third party would help to remove the bias and to give it rigor. And if we take that away, then is it still going to be valuable? So that's my own kind of question. Yep. So thanks for listening to that. I think I'm going to pass over to. I'm going to sit down. Yeah.
I'll just share very quickly there. Thanks, Emily. And I just want to kind of add on, the concept is great. We don't know if it works. It depends. It depends on the community, right? And I also have a separate but a similar idea, because IPS does surveys all the time. We're currently doing a surveys of VWOs, and it's painstaking work. We centrally devise the questions, we send it out, and response rates are low because people don't want to fill in surveys. And so what I thought, plus NCSS does their surveys, MVPC does their annual giving, so everyone does surveys. The thing is, can we do surveys in a decentralized way? I don't know, it's just a thought. I'm in charge of thinking here and not much doing. But what if the community decides what kinds of questions you're interested in? And you surface those questions, and then they go into a pool, and people can vote and prioritize which questions are worth asking. And then you fill in and answer the questions you suggested. And if you fill it in, you get access to the data, so it belongs to you. If IPS does the survey, the data belongs to us. We have to protect it. There's IRB and all that. If NCSS does the survey, it's NCSS data. Is there a way to decentralize it? And that's also a question. Can we open source all these things? So, anyone have questions for Emily? Anyone keen to do this? We don't have the answers, but potentially people can kind of form an informal working group, think it through. Some technologies will help us, consult with people who know about PDPA, etc., and we'll see if it happens. But it's just posing an opportunity.
I didn't use the word community.
Okay, I'm not the community police.
You're being blacklisted. The community police, that's what you are.
What? I just said I'm not the community police. Okay. So as a citizen, the questions that I'd be interested in, like data about VWs or organizations, would be their values. I think that's interesting data for people to have access to. Where does an organization stand on different issues? How representative they are of the communities they say they represent? Those types of analysis, I think, are quite fascinating and meaningful to have in. And I think we don't talk about that a whole lot in Singapore, so I do think it's useful information even to collaborate, to know how aligned you are in terms of your values. Where do you stand on human rights? Where do you stand on different issues? Do you think, I don't know, questions that a lot of us are afraid to answer, like, do you believe in a minimum wage? I don't know if you work on poverty. I think it's useful to know that kind of, what kinds of values an organization stands for, as well as their practices. Like, do they, if they say they work with the LGBT community or migrant workers, how much are those people's voices heard within the organization? Are they an organization of those people, or do they merely speak on behalf of? Like, those things I think are really interesting, valuable information to have on a platform like this.
Right, so she's not just data like finances, revenue, your volunteers, but also the values that you have and the practices that you have.
Thanks for that. Shorter than last comment as well, so. With the qualitative responses, I think when we've done it to date and we've sort of, I don't know, appointed ourselves as this centralized organization who will collect data from different organizations and sort of calibrate it and then key it into the database. I guess we've had at least some level of ability to interpret and kind of make a consistent assessment of what each of the organizations is saying and then put it up. What I'm wondering is if we can move it over to this more like open source approach, if we just make a Google Doc and then we ask qualitative questions, will different people understand those questions in different ways and answer them in very different ways? And will it therefore be meaningful, or what could we do to try and sort of bring some kind of order to the responses? I'm struggling for the words here. I've got a very young baby, so I don't sleep at night, excuse. But you see what I mean, Justin, right? So I hear you, and I guess this is my question kind of back at the group as well, is could we put in those qualitative fields, and if so, is there a way to kind of manage that, or do we just leave it free text and sort of see what gets thrown in?
It'd be nice in the future if it's a dialogue. It's like this is the stage and there's an audience, so it's harder. But I guess to add on a bit, I've kind of studied a little bit about the so-called charity watchdogs in other countries, right? So you have Charity Navigator, GuideStar. Sometimes it's done by a non-profit, sometimes it's done by a think tank. And they consolidate. They do what Emily's trying to do, right? They consolidate, they build up analysis of the non-profit sector, and they inform funders what's worth investing in. And sometimes it's, people get really upset because sometimes it's like, if you write a bad review or report or you get a bad rating, your funding depletes based on that report. So there's a lot of power that comes from having the data. Knowledge is power. And so then, if you are a strong, credible agency, then you can do the work well and you can pull in information. If not, but nonetheless, there's still this unequal power structure, right? Can we decentralize power then? Can we have the community own the data? And you know, if I would like to know if I'm running a senior activity center, well, so what's the fundraising efficiency of others like me in different neighborhoods? I would like to access data and it informs my own planning, right? Once you have the knowledge in your own hands, you can do things with it, right? So that's, I guess, where I was coming from. Other questions? Or to express interest or to caution? Yes.
Mine's not a question. Because we've been talking a lot about, thinking a lot about quota hiring. We have a community of people who are disabled by accident, by disease, by birth, whether it's blind, handicapped. They all do not have jobs, most of them. And they're very poor by nature, by their disability. There wouldn't be a social problem if these people do not have jobs. Can you imagine if one day my neighbor died because, as Mr. Gerald was saying, he just don't want to inconvenience his neighbor, or he doesn't have the money. He just say, I do not need. So, but the problem that we cannot see today, if we do not have content hiring, will become a national issue of our neighbors, ourselves, suffering it. I want to ask, I'm sure everyone here have a friend who's disabled by disease in all nature or by birth or by all kind of problem in the world. If we have to take the courage to do something of the unknown, a quota hiring to the national level by the government, discussing in parliament, let us know on behalf of the citizen, as a disabled mom, whether it's autistic or blind, what can we do as a community representative? Bring it to such a serious problem that they discuss it in parliament, that something can be done for these people. I am tired of discussing it, but not doing anything. I want to do something when I still have tomorrow or maybe today, I'm not sure. It's very urgent, especially for people who have invisible disability among our peers here, because they have the hands and the eyes to use, but they don't have the brain. But they need the protection of a community, and some of them have extraordinary abilities that is unseen, and it's so wasted that they have gone overseas. So I'm concerned that because we didn't bring it to a national level, and the MPs and the government and authorities cannot make decisions, and people in other countries like Myanmar are having quota hiring, and countries are doing it because they are not, I think they are not fearful of the unknown, and they are not counting monies and dollars. That's why they dare to go out. It will all depend on numbers and economy to decide on the decision that's important of our life. Then I'm very sad to say that we have lost our humanity.
Thank you for that. Actually, you just kind of skipped to the community dialogue part of it. So we will register that, and if people are keen to support this initiative, want to join a working group to study quota hiring in Singapore, I think in our feedback form, we'll send it out to everyone and can indicate, okay, do you want to be part of this, part of that? But thank you for sharing that. So did anyone else have, I mean, that's, I guess, the spirit of community, right? It's us being here, and we're human beings, right? All this is just the administrative infrastructure that allows us to be with one another. And we are talking about abstract things like data, but there are real issues like that. And so we have to remember that these issues matter to real people. Besides the fake community of professionals and the fake community of organizations, there's a real community here. Hi.
Hi, I'm Desmond from the Lane Center. Thank you, Emily. So my experience is largely in the international development sector. I just moved back from Cambodia recently, originally from Singapore. But as I kind of interacted with different SSOs, different VWs, what I found out is, I guess in international development sector, we struggle a lot with, our priority a lot, it's on generating impact data. Output, we track everything, output, outcome, indicators, and all that. I was just wondering if I missed it earlier. Are you tracking those data? Are you collecting those data? And also, if you could share with us your impression of, I guess, local SSOs, local VWOs, in terms of having good M&E systems or good logical framework thinking to generate good, meaningful data to present. Yeah.
Thanks for that question, Desmond. It's quite close to my heart. Yeah, we want, I mean, you saw I had that slide up, that kind of joking one about, we touched 1 million lives, you know, that type of statement, which I want to kind of fight against. So we did have an agenda to try and put in more real output, outcome, you know, impact section that would go against this 1 million lives thing. But then, of course, in reality, any outputs or outcomes that an individual organization reports, you're not going to be able to kind of benchmark them against anyone else, because it's all being collected in a different context and so on and so forth. It's also all self-reported, even though we as a third party kind of aggregated it. We didn't actually go in and do an impact audit on all of these 58 organizations. We just asked them what are their output outcome metrics that they've collected, and then we put them into the data set. So that wasn't very satisfactory. So what we've what we've done to try and go one level beyond that, at least, is to look at what is each organization's attitude and process towards this task of measuring impact. So if we forget about like the actual numbers and the actual quotes and stuff that people are reporting, just look at which are the organizations that have a strong investment in this area and for whom it's something that they think about very regularly and it's kind of integrated at all levels of the organization, versus which are the organizations that don't see this as kind of useful way to spend donor money and better to channel it all directly into the program. And so we made kind of 3 free text boxes, and one of them is about kind of what is your impact measurement framework, like do you have a logic model or do you have a theory of change, to your question. And then the next one is about what's your approach to collecting data, and then the third one is about how do you use the data that you collect. And there's just, I mean, it's not long, there's like a paragraph of text on each of those for each of the organizations. You're like, okay, one of your questions is what's the kind of the result of that, or what did that tell us? Maybe overall across the sample, not so many organizations have things like theory of change, or at least ones that they want to publish and shout about. And maybe there was quite a lot of when we asked people how do you use the data, I think that was an area that not many had a really, really strong answer to. Maybe there was a thing of, although everyone's collecting data, it's often you collect it because you have to feed it to certain funders, rather than we collect it and we have like a very set process for making sure that teams reflect on the findings and that we communicate it back to the communities that we serve and la 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 la. So maybe, if I want to kind of venture a conclusion from it, there's maybe opportunity across the sector to do more on how we use the data and the research findings that we gather within organizations. I can waffle for a long time. I love your questions, so I can waffle for more, but hopefully that gets the basics, yeah.
Hi, Emily. Joyce, Commodity Foundation. Maybe can I respond to a comment that Justin has made about people watchdog and all that? And I think there's a possibility to decentralize the power to the nonprofits if we sort of demystify how donors evaluate funding. That could be a way, because a lot of people have some resistance. I mean, I think the elephant in the room here is really, okay, yes, resources, time, and projects and all that has an impact on how you put the data out there. But I think a lot of people have resistance because they are fear of being judged, to say, okay, if I put my data out there, people know I'm well-funded, I'm not good enough, donors are not going to come in and all that. Perhaps one of the ways is really to look at how funders evaluate giving. I only can think of the Tinder app as an analogy to it. Basically, when you put out your financials and all that, it's just basically telling people your weight, height, likes and dislike. End of the day, the match between a donor's giving as well as to the charity is also about the personality of the charity, the way you want to work together. There's all these other things that goes into the bringing of a donor funding into a charity's program. So it's really not just about the data out there, but the data provide an initial proxy for you to say, do I like this person enough or this organization enough to find out more? And that's when I started thinking, if there is something about demystifying how donors go about funding a charity, maybe that would help them to sort of not have this fear of opening themselves up for people to understand them better. Then the mindset is really that for something like that to happen, you're really looking at getting yourself out there so more people get to know you better for who you are, and what you're trying to do. So the last thing I wanted to put out here is really to say, if it's a dialogue, right, how many of us in the room is willing to say, yes, I will contribute to Emily's, this program and put my data out there? I mean, if we are here as a community wanting to do something and we are not even considering wanting to do this ourselves, then it will always be the other, and where is the I in the picture? Yeah, so that's a thought.
So are you on board building a Tinder app together?
I I don't know how to build a Tinder app, but I can try. So one of the things that CFS has with MVPC is, we started this collabs thingy and then we are doing it, right? We are considering whether is there a way we could put the information out onto the social collabs wiki so that we don't have to build and host another thing. Yes, we are willing to try and we are willing to say, okay, what role can I play to start putting the data up there?
Thanks a lot, Joyce, and for you picked up on the question that I was asking amongst this community. Let's do it, show of hands. First of all, because I don't think this is necessarily relevant for, say, students or even researchers, sorry, Justin, but first of all, stick up your hand if you're actually working within a non-profit organisation on the ground. Okay, and then could you just keep your hand up if you think you'd find the time to fill in this Google sheet once a year? The hands have just gradually gone down. Joyce's hand is like firmly up. And then Marissa at the front, okay, you're like
it's about 5
converted,
to 7.
right? So yeah, and then there's a couple of like little hands kind of just being polite. Yeah, I think that is our challenge. And back to the previous panel with the needs assessment as well. It's fine for research assistants, interns, students, even sector network organizations, which at least have some mandate for knowledge sharing. But for those who are actually working on the ground, this is not going to be your priority. Where's the incentive or where's the time to be able to participate? That's the challenge, I think.
I like how sneaky you are. Once your hands are up, it's harder to go down. It's like...
They did a great job.
Any last questions? Last question, if you want. Sure.
I'll keep it short, I promise. With the information that you're asking for, you said it's like a long thing about 8 pages and stuff like that. Do you mine some of the data first and then ask for the gaps to be filled in? Because a lot of I had a quick look, like the financial information, all that stuff is available in Charity Portal, and all that you do, yeah? So the 8 pages is still after you mine that data? Oh, then it's not that much, right?
Hi, so we recognize that a lot of data is actually out there, either through Charity Portal or through annual reports and other reports that charities themselves, non-profit organizations themselves put out. And we always do pre-homework first, so we do as much factual data as we can, but we've actually realized that not a lot is out there in the public domain. Some of the more valuable data we can only get by going to the charity, going to the non-profit themselves and doing an interview. And kind of to your question of values, that was something that we did discuss very early on when formulating what should go into the profile itself. But I think there are larger questions of who, depending on who we speak to in the organization, whether it's someone that is more that has more of a marketing mandate versus the person who has a ED role mandate or a more operational mandate, we might get very different answers, and that was a conscious decision almost to not try to go too deep into qualitative type things that would be difficult to be assured that it stands for the whole organization, if that makes sense. So 8 pages it might not seem like a lot, but sometimes depending on who we got put in touch with in the organization, we're realizing that information sometimes is not shared all across the organization. So we ended up having sometimes to talk to 3 different people in order to get the full picture. I don't know if that's helpful, but I think that's kind of why we are very interested in making it something that's open source that other people could contribute to, because I think the burden on any one person could be relatively heavy if it was all on just that person.
And that would be a good way to end. Thank you, Wendy, and a round of applause for Wendy and Emily. Tea break. Come back at 3:30 and we will listen to volunteer-driven, volunteer-designed, volunteer platforms.